Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Authenticity Amplifier. I'm here with today's guest, Pam Lippitt, the CEO and Chief Communicator of Pamela Lippitt Communications. Pam has been a public speaker since her teens, with a career built around communicating in high stakes environments, from boardrooms to leadership teams. Over time, she has owned the art of saying what matters clearly and consistently. Her work focuses on helping leaders communicate with confidence, build trust through clarity, and make an impact without overcomplicating their message. In this conversation, we explore why concise communication is such a powerful leadership skill, how preparation actually supports authenticity, and what it takes to ensure your words and actions align. Pam, I am so glad you're here. Welcome to Amplifying Authenticity.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to join you. We didn't know before we got on the phone that we're on the Zoom that we're really only about 25 minutes away from each other.
Right.
So we look forward to continuing in person.
Isn't that just great? I mean, it brings whole new meaning to the idea of it's a small world, right?
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to start our conversation today around the idea of reframing communication, not as a soft skill, but as a core leadership practice.
So I would say soft skill in terms of the fact that it is not 1 + 1 = 2. However, you can make it literally, actually, 1 + 1 = 100.
Mm,
Because as you practice, as you get comfortable in your own voice, something I was not always comfortable with, watching myself on the screen and hearing myself is really kind of tricky. But as you get more comfortable in your skin, as you practice, as you become more natural, it just becomes another part of you um that just you move forward with.
yeah. When did you, because you're speaking a lot around the idea of with practice, right? And it's not about
Yes.
practice turns into perfect, because I don't believe anyone is perfect, right?
No,
However, yeah.
practice to me means confidence.
Mm,
Not perfect. I am so not perfect.
right.
Everybody thinks I was a straight A student. I was an A- B+ student, and I was absolutely happy with that because it meant I had time for other things in my life.
I think
So,
that's so funny right there, just the dichotomy of I wasn't an A student. I was an A-B+ student. That's still a really good student, Pam.
well, my brother is really smart. And so not only did I have some of the same teachers as him in high school, I had some of the same teachers as the professors who asked me if he was my brother in college. So I learned
Mm,
very quickly to say, yes, but I am not like, I am
right.
not as smart. So I own that, which is fine.
And as I'm hearing you speak, I think that's something that so many people can resonate with. It's an idea of how we are comparatively in society with one another, right? We are compared to others because as I'm hearing you speak and I'm hearing about your accomplishments, A-B+, that's a great student. And in your head, you're like, but I'm not as smart as my brother.
Because I didn't care. Well, I
Hmm.
disagree. I will back up. I probably am as smart as
I'm
him.
hoping you're going to say that. That's why I kept saying it, Pam.
I always say that he's the book smart and I'm the street smart.
And I believe that everyone is smart, right? In different
Yes.
ways. And I have this conversation with my son all the time because he has followed in many of my footsteps and then also created many of his own paths as well, right? So my son plays flute just like I do. My son has been in marching band. My son has done some things that I also did. And there's other things that he has done, like robotics, that I never got into, right? And I constantly am telling him, "You are so much smarter than me in so many areas." And he constantly comes back and says, "But I'll never be as smart as you." And I said, "Here's the thing. What I love, I put a lot of passion and practice and commitment into. And what you love, you put a lot of practice, passion, and commitment into. If we don't love the same thing, we're never going to be at the same level of it." Do you think
Right.
that passion plays into speaking or communicating?
So I'll tell you the funny thing. Well, I'll tell you two things about this. Um, my mother was a firm believer in each of us following our own paths, even though we like to do a lot of similar things. And because I was younger, she really wanted me to have my own success and my own paths, which is really important. And so while, there are a lot of similarities of what we're good at, there were very different things that came in terms of like extracurriculars. So he had private piano lessons. I had piano lessons from our community center that were not as good, and I dropped off quickly. I had a lot more art lessons, even though he's a great artist. But
Mhm.
we just moved things to she moved us to different spots.
Mm.
I took weaving lessons. He was a debater in high school. I took some debate college classes in college, but it never interested me to move forward. He
Yeah.
was a public speaker early in life. I seem to be a public speaker at this point. So it's just
Mm.
how things kind of fall out and turn around, and I'm fine with that. I don't know if he
Yeah.
is, but I'm fine with that. So yeah, I
Absolutely.
think it all plays into each other, but it's how things are framed for you, right?
Right.
So, you
And it's
know,
y
success
another
is a very funny thing.
Yeah. And you also talk about that consistency, right? You talk about how what you practice and what you become consistent with is where you see more success and where you are able to be more authentic. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So I do a lot of work supporting networking and teaching people how to network better, teaching teams, companies how to network with a consistent and same message, but everybody in their own voice, right?
Mm.
Because
Mhm.
I hate I love robotics, but I hate robotic voices.
Mhm.
So if someone comes to me and or I'm in a program and someone is clearly reading to me, I'm kind of finished and I tune out and I feel like, why don't you just send me something? I'll read it at night. I want the interaction and the effort put in and the kind of like, um, more natural way of speaking.
Mm.
And so I find and I teach the way to do that is to have the preparation behind you, to have, I call it the quiver of arrows, to have all the arrows loaded in the quiver so they're ready to pull out as needed.
Mm.
So I'm because I'm artistic and a lefty, I always think in asymmetrical terms. And
Mhm.
so I think in terms of threes. I always like things of threes. In any presentation, you'll see there's always an odd number, and usually that number is three. So I
Mm.
talk about, have three business things you want to share that you already know, and three personal things.
Mm.
And if you kind of have that, not kind of, if you have that in advance,
Mhm.
then it becomes natural to talk about them because you don't have to think on the spot. You just have to
Mm.
reframe on the spot.
Yeah. And I think the idea of being natural, being in your own voice, really kind of weaves into the idea of being authentic as well.
Absolutely.
Right. And when
Absolutely.
we're speaking, there's a difference of someone speaking about their company, right? That they founded, that they created. It's their baby, their passion project, and someone who is working for a company that hopefully still aligns to their values. But what big difference do you see when you're helping people craft their message or prepare their quiver of arrows? How do you help them in those two different situations?
I have an exercise that I've put together where if I'm meeting with like a team of 6 or 7 or however many people I'm meeting with, I have everybody write out the 3 things they would share about their company that they work for.
Mm.
And then we go around the room and people read the 3 things they've written down, and I put them on, the virtual screen, or type them on my computer so they're up on the screen, up on the board. And it is always amazing that the top 3 things people talk about are entirely different. It
Mm.
could be you're in a different silo of the company, it could be you're in a different department in the company, but it's all very different. And one of the things I work with groups on is when you go, for example, to a conference, and so there's 5 or 6 people at the conference representing your company, right? You all have to talk about the same company. So someone that you've talked to, if someone has talked to 3 or 4 people, you are really embedding that company in the same voice, in your own voice, but the
Mhm.
same structure, the same important parts of a company to whoever's listening, so that they don't go away and think there's 5 different companies they've spoken to.
That is so important. And honestly, Pam, I had a light bulb moment of I believe everyone on my team believes in the work we do. I believe that everyone knows very strongly what we do. However, I've never asked them if you were to introduce our company to someone, what 3 things would you say? And I don't know that everyone would say the same 3 things. Maybe they would. I think there's one statement that I believe everyone would say, maybe 2, just because those are like those tag phrases. However, I don't know for sure because I've not asked them. I think I'm gonna weave that into an activity coming up for a leadership meeting.
Or you could bring me in to do a leadership meeting,
There you
and I
go.
will do that plus more, because that's what I
Yeah.
do. And we walk away all feeling good. Now, I'm not saying all 3 have to be exactly the same or the words have to be the same, but the sentiment has to be the same. And
Right.
I am willing to tell you that I don't think they're using the taglines, because a tagline is just a tagline. It's not really a conversational moment necessarily. It's something you can weave in. You
Mhm.
know, I can give you my tagline. It's on my paperwork. I don't really use it otherwise. I
Yeah.
jump off it, but I
Mhm.
don't use it.
Right.
And I would also say that it's okay if that third thing, it pertains to what you do for the company.
Mhm.
So it's not robot. I don't want it to be robotic. Again,
Right.
I'm using I don't want it to be memorized. You go to a networking event, you can always tell the people who have learned to memorize what they do.
Mhm. Absolutely.
There's Yeah, right. There's a lack of emotion. There's getting through the sentences as opposed to conveying the thought.
Mhm.
And I think conveying the thought is what makes you authentic.
Absolutely. And truly believing in the thought that you're conveying.
Yes. If not,
Absolutely.
it may be time for a new job.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Just say it.
Yeah.
Just
Not like we're promoting anyone to find a new job.
No,
However, I
no, not at
actually
all,
just
but
spoke with
sometimes
someone last week on the podcast, who helps people find their dream job of just because you can do something doesn't mean that's what you need to be doing. Because we all have a lot of skills, but if it's not something that lights you up from the inside, it's not gonna light anyone else up either. And our whole goal in life is to light people up around us, right?
right.
Yeah.
My goal is always to make introductions to other people, for between people.
Love
That's
that.
kind of that's where I get my joy. At
I
this
love
point
that.
in my career, that's where I get my joy, is to
Yeah.
make those connections.
Yeah. My joy is providing a space for everyone to be truly seen, heard, welcomed, and valued. And that's as a child and growing up as a young adult, I had random people, strangers, just come up to me and start telling me their entire life story. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is it? And I actually leaned into that and said, that's my superpower, right? I think many of us know people that could get a life story out of someone who never talked about themselves before, ever. But for
Right.
whatever reason, there's some people in our lives that can get all the information simply by their presence and how they are a part of that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes they talk too long. So I'm always about helping people listen more than talk,
Yep. Yep.
and pauses. I think pausing is highly underrated. I'm
Mhm.
a firm believer in pausing to let the other person into a conversation,
Mhm.
to allow them as you're telling your story to give them space really to digest and pick up on a thread that may lead you off your story, but into something really interesting.
And people remember us based on those interesting stories, not our credentials, right?
Right.
And that kinda leads me into another point around networking because one of my biggest, I don't know if I would say pet peeves, but one of the things that turns me off the quickest in networking is when people just jump right in with all of their accolades and their titles and everything they do and all of those pieces trying to sell me on why they're a good person instead of just talking to me, right?
Right.
Or and I'm wondering if you have any kind of tips on the ideas of people coming in trying to sound impressive, quote unquote, rather than simply coming in to get to know people and build those relationships.
So, yes, yes,
Mhm.
I have pet peeves. Don't you want to hear those first?
Sure.
So, my pet peeve is someone talking to you and looking behind you to see if there's someone better in the room they'd rather talk
Oh.
to. To me, that is the killer. And I will just, I mean, I have to say I've been known to say, "Oh, I think you do you want to talk to them? I'll move out of the conversation." Because it's not a value to me to be there if someone else isn't interested in being there with me.
Mhm.
Um but I also help people come up with interesting questions and things that aren't necessarily like a linear narrative because nobody cares. It's kind of like saying to someone, "How are you?" and
Mhm.
thinking, "Oh, I don't know why I must be hitting something. Let me hold on." Um, uh, uh, you know, I would rather have like a true conversation that gets continued.
Mm,
We've already discussed based on that intro conversation that we're going to meet for coffee one day.
mhm.
So we already know that we have created space for follow up and to dive deeper. So
Mhm.
I don't necessarily need to dive deeper here. What will we talk about then,
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I'm having coffee with my best friend at the end of the day and it's like would we people say, "Do you ever run out of things to talk about?" And someone the other day just that I was staying with said to me, "Do you know that you like have an inner conversation and then you start talking out loud and asking questions in the middle of it?" And I said, "Oh, well, that's because when I talk with my best friend, we already know what the other person's thinking. We don't need to
Mhm.
start at the beginning.
Right.
We can start in the middle. They're going to know exactly what we mean anyway."
Mhm.
So I like that authentic part. I was just on an intro call with someone I met through a program I'm in, and I left him by saying, I always like to have a question that weaves in that's going to make you remember me and is going to be different than everybody else's question. So I will tell you my question, but I will suggest to your listeners that you come up with something else that's important to you
Mhm.
because this is important to me.
Mhm.
So my question always is, what is your favorite sound?
Hmm.
That's the answer every single time. Hmm. So I will start and tell you mine, which gives you the opportunity to think about yours without putting you on the spot.
Okay.
So mine is the sound of water lapping against the edge of a beach, of a lake, of a pool, whatever it is, that lapping sound of water.
Hmm. I would say my favorite sound is my son laughing, just like that unbridled, laughter. He has a very unique laugh, and it comes out of nowhere. It's not like
And
he
how old is
builds up
he?
to it. He's 15, almost 16. It's
Okay.
not like it builds up to that laugh. He just that's his laugh. And when you can almost see his face, even if you've never met him, the sound of his laugh, you can almost see his face because you can just tell that his cheeks are scrunched and he can barely see out of his eyes. And he's just got a huge, infectious laugh.
Now, you have told me something about yourself and him, and I can use that tidbit
Hmm.
when I follow up with you in writing after the fact, continue a conversation.
I love that.
And
Absolutely.
that will set me apart. So if I were sending you, and I may just send you an email afterwards or the next day after I met you, I have written on the back of your card or in my notes when I get in the car that you said your favorite sound was your son's like gigantic laugh
Hmm.
and his, what'd you call it? His unbridled laugh.
Hmm.
And I will put that into my email to you so
Hmm.
that it continues the relationship.
Right.
And
And
you know exactly who I am when I say it.
yeah. And that brings in the idea of aligning what we say we're going to do and actually doing it, right? Aligning our actions and our words. It's,
Right.
I care enough to ask you this question, and I actually want to know the answer. And I'm going to show you that I was listening to you when you gave me the answer.
Right.
Because I
I
think
don't
there's a
do it
lot of
every
that.
time.
Yeah.
I don't use it every time, I have to say.
Right.
But when I really want to connect with someone and really want to continue,
Hmm.
that's when I use it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it really kind of just hones in on the idea of we say a lot of things, right? Communication is funny like that. We say a lot of things
Right.
without really taking the time to reflect on what it means. Perfect example that I say quite a bit is if you are walking past someone, when I used to work in an office setting and I would walk
Mhm.
past others in the office, I would walk by them and say, "Good morning, how are you?" But I wouldn't actually stop in the hallway and listen to their response. Or if people were walking by me saying, "Hello, how are you?" They would keep walking and I would be like, "Well, you just asked me a question. Do you want to hear the answer?" And I think
Well,
that's such a common example that we do.
sadly, the answer usually is fine, but the world, such as it is, nobody is fine. I don't
Right.
care where you are, nobody's fine. But we learn early on in our lives that nobody wants to really hear the truth.
Right. Absolutely. And my response to that always now is if people ask me, "How are you?" I will say, "Would you like to know the real answer or would you like the polite answer of fine?" And that
Yeah.
usually right there is a conversation starter in and of itself. Because people are like, "Oh my gosh, I haven't thought about that," or, "Oh, you're right.
Right.
Oh, I want the real answer." Right?
Right. Sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the just hello. Sometimes just saying hello, good to see you, is a
Mhm.
complete thought
Mhm.
without asking the question because sometimes you don't have time for the answers
Mhm.
or you don't care about the answer. So just make your comment a complete thought, not a question.
Absolutely. And that's a huge piece. If you don't care or you don't have the time, that's okay. And
Yes.
don't ask the question. Because I think
Right.
sometimes we ask questions or we go into conversation out of guilt because we feel like that's the societally correct or the polite thing to do. It's more impolite to ask and not listen or not care about the response.
Right.
Absolutely.
I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Um there's so to me communication and being authentic is a lot about nuance
Mhm.
and really reading the room.
Mhm.
I was at a networking event last summer, I think, on the roof of the Madison building downtown in Detroit. It was for VCs, and so that's a good place for me to show up because it's usually a new team, a team that's interested. They don't have money, but they're interested
Right.
in learning more. And yet another person I asked about his company, his startup. Maybe he thought I had money to invest, but I made it very clear I didn't. I just wanted to know. He started by talking about all the iterations of the startup that have failed and talked for 20 minutes. I heard 9 iterations of something that failed. And my tip, if you're a startup or you're money, people don't want to know how many times you failed, and they don't want to know why you failed in a product. They want to know where you're at today and why you're successful and why you're ready to take the next step. And there is no point in an introduction of tying people up like that, because there's no way to walk away. I'm like, oh, and this product didn't work because of this. So one of my jobs, I've had a very interesting career life, but I had a job that I probably might still have. And I probably might, that doesn't make sense. I might still have. Someone recruited me, someone I knew recruited me. He sold the business, and the company that took over didn't want innovative people. They just really wanted the engineers. And so I worked with startups. It was like CAD CAM, 3D CAD CAM for engineers. Your robotic son will explain this to you later, but it's the it's the stuff that goes into the computer that then makes something on a 3D printer, basically.
Okay.
Computer. So I learned how to do that, and then I actually am Facebook friends with my geometry teacher from high school, and I sent her the video, and I said, I actually still knew what some of these words meant. Who knew geometry would make sense so much later? But so I have a knowledge of those things, and I've worked with a lot of startups, and I really help them to put the right things in the front of the story. It's the old journalism story. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them.
Yep.
That's really important. And the leading with the important stuff, not bearing the lead. We bury the lead in our own conversations and our own lives enough. And I'm here to get that lead where it needs to be.
I love that, Pam. Now, you mentioned briefly, just real quickly there, about other positions you've had, other jobs you've had. I would love to know your why. Why is communication and clarity, why is that what you're doing today? And why is that your authentic position?
So I actually have a degree from the University of Michigan in communication. So that sets me apart right there. I think that was raising my hand because I put it up. I must have my gesturing on. And so everything I have done in my life, and I think everyone's work starts with how you communicate and tell your story. My first job, so it's always been my through line, right? So my first job, I worked with high school teenagers who were mostly taller than me and looked older than me. I'm still friends with a lot of them many, 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 many years later because I had a good relationship, and it was an honest relationship, and they knew what they could get away with, and they knew what they totally could not get away with, and where I drew the line in the sand. And I'll give you an example, and then I'll move forward quickly. An example was the first year I was director, and I was director over a 6-state region as a 22-year-old walking out of college, and with 17 and 18-year-olds. And the first kid who had a problem started swearing at me. Now, okay, not for nothing, I went to college. I can swear like a sailor too. And I looked at him and said, you're not going to get anywhere with me if you don't use your words. I don't know where that came from, but it came from my gut. I never said that again. But every time a new kid kind of opened a mouth, someone else for 6 years would say to them, you better stop. You are finished with Pam if you just swear. You better figure out how to talk to her. I never said it a second time. I found that to be so interesting and so empowering. So I think I learned in that moment how concise and words and sticking to your guns change everything.
Absolutely.
And it only takes one message, one time to change the direction.
Mm.
From that, I left there and I opened my own business. I owned a direct mailing company it's still around, for 40 years. All right, don't tell, because I'm only 39. I started very young.
Mm.
Um, but in that role, I was doing the marketing, the fulfillment, all the interactions with the clients, all of it, the client acquisition. And so how I talked to people and how I held my ground with a lot of men was really important.
Mhm.
I was able to hold my ground because of the other things I had learned. And once, especially men, I hate to say this, learned they couldn't take advantage of a young gal, the whole business relationship changed because I was about the business.
Mm.
And so those kind of things just always followed. I ran another nonprofit where I was lucky enough. I traveled with the governor to Israel on a mission, and I set up all the business meetings for him, and it was a great opportunity to be seen and to do other things statewide and state level. I've always been involved, um, supporting candidates financially, what I can, but definitely in terms of talking about them and encouraging people to listen to what they have to say. And so I've always followed this path. And then when I decided it was time to really just do me again,
Mhm.
it was a natural thing for it to be about communication and how people speak to each other and how people move forward together.
I love that.
Sorry, long answer.
No, I love that, absolutely. I mean, that really goes back to oftentimes we know from a very early age what our passion is and how we align to that. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of other steps along the way to be able to do that full time, because I think I just had a conversation with another one of our guests about how they always knew that they wanted to be an artist, but they always were told from the outside that artists don't make enough money. It's not a real job. What's your plan B? All of these messages that we receive from outside. And I don't think you received those messages, at least not in the stories you've shared. At the same time, you found a way to weave communications into every position you've had as your entire adult life, and transitioning and owning successful companies and doing so much important work while still laying true in the area of communication.
Right. And sometimes when I talk with people about what they're doing and what their thoughts are, I always ask people about their hobbies
Mm.
because I think your hobbies tell a lot about you.
Mhm.
So I was talking to someone who's a life master, many levels above that, grandmaster in bridge. And I said to him, so you have a through line. Your through line is you're analytical, you know how to assess the situation. And we went through a list of things that a bridge player needs to, you work well with a partner. We went through all these things that a bridge player to succeed needs.
Mhm.
And those are through lines that you can then take toward your next job or
Mhm.
toward what you're doing. Sometimes, especially, there's this old joke that, people who are huge business people get to a nonprofit board position and meeting, and you would think they never owned a business, they never worked in an executive position. All
Mhm.
that knowledge is left at the door,
Right.
and how they treat people is left at the door, and their expectations are left at the door. And to me, that's always amazing because you're
Mhm.
put on a board because you're successful, not necessarily, and I'm not talking about financially successful. I'm
Mhm.
talking about successful in what you're doing that aligns with that board.
Mhm.
And then you leave all that knowledge behind you. And
Mhm.
I've never understood that.
Yeah. So we've spoken about messages that you convey when you're networking, messages you convey in a boardroom, messages you convey with your team, all of these different messages. I'm wondering, from your perspective, what do you believe makes a message memorable?
Well, I think being unique. we're
Mhm.
talking about being authentic. If your message is just something you're making up on the fly, it's not your message.
Mhm.
It's just a momentary comment that can go in one ear and out the other. So you really have to know, to thine own self be true, right?
Mhm.
And it's probably Shakespeare.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that's the case. I think that's your message, is
Mhm.
to be true to yourself.
Yeah. And I will say for myself, I do a lot of speaking and I'm doing a lot of trainings, and I don't script everything I say. I just don't believe in that. I don't do that because it's embedded within me, right? I am authentically speaking from my own passion, from my own experience, from doing a lot of research, but believing in the research so much that it becomes part of how I see the world, how I communicate. And I am often told during presentations or during trainings, "Oh my gosh, say that again, that was great." And I'm like, "What did I just say?" Right? And I think that that's part of it too. It's not about having a script. It's about being prepared to know what the focus is, what the message is that you want to convey, not necessarily being so memorized or so in the moment that you are not. I don't know exactly how to say that, but what I'm trying to convey is
I
I say
understand.
things in the moment because it's who I am and it's the passion that I'm speaking through. I don't know if I can repeat everything I've said, right? And there have
Right.
been times in the past, in specifically my leadership team meetings, where we had a list of mechanisms, right? They were those list of things because I'll just drop these little nuggets. I'll be like, "Ooh, my brain's going this way. Let me say that." And it would be a nugget, and I would say it, and they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, that's such a good way of saying what we know is happening within the company. We know what's going on, but it was a different way of saying it," right? And I think that's
Right.
what you're speaking to is you have to know what the foundation is. You have to know the information. You have to believe in the information, and then you put your own spin on how you say that.
Yes.
But you have to have that foundation.
Yeah. So I too never write a speech.
Mhm.
However, the caveat to that is I always write the opening paragraph and the ending paragraph, and then I bullet point the entire speech
Mm.
so that I might have like phrases in those bullet points that I want to make sure I get to. And it gives me the order of things. You always know when someone isn't, I mean, I hate to use this as an example, but like at a funeral, when someone gets up and isn't prepared and hasn't written anything and they're emotional, and then instead of being a 5-minute piece, it's a 20-minute ramble.
Mhm.
I almost always have that paragraph, those two paragraphs down pat. But if I'm lost or if I'm nervous, and I think it's good to be a little nervous when you start
Mhm.
speaking. If you don't, I feel something's wrong. You should have
Mm.
a little bit of butterflies. I mean, because it's important.
Mhm.
I feel it's important to have the butterflies because it shows the um the level of commitment and the level of work that you've put into something, how you
Mhm.
feel it's important, that
Absolutely.
you have prepared for it.
Yeah.
I almost never have to use the written thing at the end,
Right.
but I have it. And
Right.
just because I have it, I don't need it.
Right.
It's my umbrella makes it not rain theory in life.
Absolutely. Pam, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Been wonderful.
Absolutely. And for those listening, you can learn more about Pam's work at PamelaLippitt.com. Connect with her on LinkedIn and access her free resource and email list that we're going to link below in the show notes. She also hosts her own podcast, which we'll be able to share as well. And before we
Yes.
go, one final question for you, Pam.
Okay.
If listeners remember just one sentence, one statement, one component of today's chat, what would you like them to remember?
The more prepared you are, the more it sounds like you're not prepared.
Mm, I love that. Being prepared to not sound prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then
Beautiful.
it's natural. And
Yeah.
it's natural.
And it's authentic.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pam. And thank you to everyone listening. If this episode reminded you that saying less, but saying it well, can be one of the most authentic things you do, I hope you carry that forward. I'm Megan Fucciarelli, and until next time, keep speaking with clarity, showing up with intention, and amplifying authenticity in every conversation.